Sometimes, the most extraordinary love stories begin with the most ordinary moments. What would you do if you discovered that the girl serving your coffee every morning was actually the long-lost daughter of one of the world's most powerful billionaires? And what if, in that very moment of revelation, your heart decided it belonged to her forever? This is the story of Emma Chun, a girl who thought she had nothing, and Alexander Blackwood, a man who had everything except the one thing that truly mattered. Emma Chun was 23 years old, with warm brown eyes that sparkled like honey in the morning sunlight and an infectious smile that could light up even the gloomiest day. Standing barely 5 feet 3 inches tall, she moved through the world with a grace that came from years of making herself invisible. Every morning at 5 a.m., she would tie her long black hair into a messy bun, slip on her worn apron, and transform the small downtown cafe called Morning Brew into a sanctuary of warmth and comfort. She had been working there for 3 years while studying business at night school, carrying textbooks that were held together with tape and dreams that seemed impossible to reach. Emma had been alone since she could remember. The foster care system had been her only family, moving her from home to home until she aged out at 18. But somehow, through all the uncertainty and heartbreak, her spirit remained unbroken. She carried within her an unshakable belief that she was meant for something more, something meaningful. What drove her every single day was a dream of building something of her own, creating a place where people felt valued and loved, even though she had never experienced that feeling herself. On the other side of the city, in a world that might as well have been on another planet, lived Alexander Blackwood. At 29, he stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, with a commanding presence that made boardrooms fall silent when he entered. His steel-gray eyes rarely showed emotion, having learned early in life that vulnerability was a luxury he couldn't afford. As the CEO of Blackwood Industries, a technology empire worth $12 billion, he commanded respect, fear, and envy in equal measure. But beneath the perfectly tailored suits and the cold exterior lived a man who had never experienced genuine love. His parents had died in a car accident when he was 16, leaving him heir to a fortune but orphaned in every way that mattered. He had built walls around his heart so high that he himself had forgotten what lay behind them. What moved him, though he would never admit it, was a desperate search for authenticity in a world where everyone wanted something from him. The story unfolded across the gleaming skyscrapers of Manhattan, where the stark contrast between wealth and struggle played out daily like a never-ending theater performance. Emma's world existed in a tiny studio apartment above the Morning Brew Cafe, with its worn wooden floors that creaked stories 100 tenants before her, walls painted in cheerful yellow to fight off the loneliness, and windows that looked out onto a busy street where life happened to other people. The cafe itself was a tiny oasis of warmth, with mismatched furniture that somehow created perfect harmony, the constant smell of fresh coffee beans that had become Emma's personal perfume, and plants hanging from every available surface, because Emma believed that everything deserved a chance to grow, even in the smallest spaces. 20 blocks north stood Morrison Tower, a 50-story monument to power and wealth that pierced the sky like a steel and glass sword. Its marble halls echoed with the footsteps of people making decisions that affected millions of lives. Its elevators carried the weight of empires, and its top-floor office, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city, belonged to Richard Morrison, a man who had everything except the one thing he wanted most. The city itself became a character in this story, showing how two worlds could exist side by side, breathing the same air, walking the same streets, yet remaining completely separate, until fate decided that some barriers were meant to be broken. Every morning at exactly 7:15 a.m., like clockwork, Alexander Blackwood would push through the glass door of Morning Brew, his expensive shoes clicking against the old wooden floors, his presence filling the small space with an energy that made other customers instinctively step aside. He would approach the counter where Emma stood, her heart inexplicably racing every single time, and order the same thing: large black coffee, no sugar, to go. For 3 months, this ritual continued. Alexander would barely acknowledge Emma's existence, his eyes focused on his phone or some important document, treating her like part of the furniture. But Emma noticed everything about him. She saw the way his shoulders carried invisible weight, how his jaw was always clenched with tension, how he never, not once, smiled. She noticed a loneliness that radiated from him like heat from a flame, and something deep inside her heart recognized a kindred spirit. Emma began doing something that would change both their lives forever. She started leaving small notes with his coffee. The first one simply said, "Hope your day is as strong as your coffee." Alexander found it stuck to his cup and nearly threw it away, but something made him pause. He read it again, and for the first time in years, the corner of his mouth almost turned upward. The notes continued. "Remember to breathe today. You're stronger than whatever you're fighting. Someone believes in you." Each morning, Alexander found himself looking forward to these brief encounters, though he couldn't understand why a simple barista was affecting him so deeply. He had never paid attention to service workers before, but Emma was different. There was something about her genuine warmth that made him feel seen, not for his money or power, but for the man he was underneath it all. Everything changed on a rainy Thursday morning in October. Emma was juggling multiple orders. The cafe was packed with people seeking shelter from the storm, and her usual grace was strained by exhaustion. She had worked a double shift the night before to earn extra money for her textbooks, and her hands were shaking from too much caffeine and too little sleep. When Alexander approached the counter, Emma reached for his usual cup, but her tired fingers betrayed her. The scalding hot coffee spilled across the counter and splashed onto Alexander's $1,000 Italian suit. The cafe fell silent. I turned to watch what would happen next. Emma's face turned white as her dreams of keeping this job evaporated before her eyes. But instead of the explosion of anger everyone expected, Alexander did something that surprised even himself. He saw Emma's tears, saw the genuine terror in her eyes, and felt something he had never experienced before. Genuine concern for someone else's well-being. "Hey," he said softly, his voice gentler than anyone had ever heard it. "It's okay. It's just a suit." Emma looked up at him through her tears, seeing kindness in those steel-gray eyes for the first time. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I can't afford to replace it, but I'll find a way. I'll work extra shifts. Stop," Alexander said, and the word came out like a caress rather than a command. "Accidents happen. Are you hurt? Did any of the coffee splash on you?" In that moment, surrounded by the smell of spilled coffee and the weight of 100 staring eyes, something shifted between them. Emma realized that this powerful, intimidating man was showing her more kindness than she had experienced in years. Alexander realized that he cared more about this girl's well-being than he had ever cared about anything material in his life. From that day forward, their morning interactions changed completely. Alexander began arriving earlier when the cafe was less crowded. Their conversations grew longer each day. Emma would share her dreams of opening her own business, her eyes lighting up as she described a place where people could feel at home, where community mattered more than profit. Alexander found himself revealing thoughts he had never spoken aloud to anyone, sharing the loneliness of success, the weight of responsibility, the emptiness of achievement without meaning. There was an electric connection between them that neither could deny, but both were terrified to name. Emma would catch herself watching for him through the window, her heart racing when she saw his tall figure approaching. Alexander began scheduling his meetings around his morning coffee, something that baffled his assistant and board members. For the first time in his adult life, business was not his top priority, but the barriers between their worlds seemed insurmountable, and both of them knew it. Alexander's business associates began to notice his distraction and were not pleased. During a board meeting, his oldest advisor, a man who had worked with Alexander's father, pulled him aside. "That girl at the coffee shop," he said with disdain. "People are talking. A man in your position cannot be seen consorting with common workers. It reflects poorly on the company, on your family name. End this foolishness before it damages everything your father built." The words stung because Alexander knew they reflected the cruel reality of his world. Society expected him to marry within his class, to choose a wife who could enhance his business interests and social standing. The idea of loving someone for who they were, rather than what they could provide, was considered naive and dangerous. Emma faced her own pressure from a different direction. Her co-worker and closest friend, Maria, had watched the growing connection with increasing concern. "Emma, honey," she said one evening as they closed the cafe together, "I've seen this story before. Rich men don't marry poor girls except in fairy tales. They play with us, make us feel special, then go back to their real lives when the novelty wears off. Don't let him break your heart. But Emma's heart was already fully invested, though she tried to hide it. She had never felt so alive, so seen, so valued as a person. When Alexander looked at her, she felt like she mattered in the world. When he asked about her dreams, she felt like they were possible. When he smiled at her notes, she felt like she could light up the entire city. The pressure from both sides of their divided worlds only made their bond stronger. It was as if the universe was testing whether their connection was real or just infatuation. Every obstacle thrown in their path only proved how much they meant to each other. Winter arrived in New York with unusual harshness that year. The city was buried under snow for weeks, and the old heating system in Emma's apartment building finally gave up completely. Emma was too proud to ask for help and too poor to afford a hotel. She continued working despite developing a severe cold that quickly turned into pneumonia. One morning, Alexander arrived at the cafe to find Emma's co-worker behind the counter. "Where's Emma?" he asked, and something in his tone made Maria look at him more carefully. "She's been sick for a week," Maria said. "Really sick. But you know Emma. She won't admit she needs help. She's been trying to work anyway. But yesterday she collapsed during her shift. I finally convinced her to go to the emergency room, but she left after an hour because she couldn't afford the treatment." Alexander felt something cold grip his chest that had nothing to do with the winter weather. Without another word, he left the cafe and made phone calls that would change everything. Within 2 hours, Emma found herself in the best private medical facility in the city, with specialists attending to her around the clock, receiving treatment that would have cost more than she made in 2 years. When Emma finally understood what had happened, the gratitude was overwhelmed by humiliation. She had been raised to believe that accepting charity was a weakness, that depending on others was dangerous. More than that, she felt like Alexander saw her as a project, someone to be fixed rather than someone to be loved. "I can't accept this," she told him when he came to visit her in the hospital room that looked more like a luxury hotel suite. "I won't be your charity case." "That's not what this is," Alexander said, but Emma was too hurt and too proud to listen. "Isn't it?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. "The poor little barista who can't take care of herself? I never asked you to save me." "I'm not trying to save you," Alexander said desperately. "I'm trying to love you." The words hung in the air between them like a confession and a prayer. It was the first time either of them had spoken the word love aloud, and it terrified them both. But Emma's pride was stronger than her heart in that moment. "Love doesn't come with a price tag," she said, "and I won't be bought, no matter how good the intentions are." She left the hospital against medical advice and disappeared from Alexander's life completely. She quit her job at Morning Brew, moved out of her apartment, and seemed to vanish into the 8 million people of New York City. Alexander was left devastated, realizing that he had fallen completely in love with Emma's strength and independence, not her vulnerability, and his attempt to help had destroyed the very thing he loved most about her. For 2 months, Alexander searched for Emma with an obsession that worried everyone around him. He hired private investigators, checked every hospital and cafe in the city, even had people searching homeless shelters because he was terrified that Emma's pride might put her in danger. His business began to suffer as he spent more time looking for her than running his company. Meanwhile, across town in his mahogany paneled office at Morrison Tower, Richard Morrison was conducting his own desperate search. For 20 years, ever since that terrible night when his life had fallen apart, he had been looking for his daughter. The accident had taken his wife instantly, and when he woke up in a hospital, they told him his 3-year-old daughter had died too. But Richard had never believed it. Something deep in his father's heart insisted that she was alive, somewhere in the world, waiting for him to find her. Richard had spent millions over the years on private investigators, psychics, DNA databases, and false leads that always ended in heartbreak. He had never remarried, never had other children, because no one could replace his Emma. Yes, his daughter's name had been Emma Morrison, and she would be 23 years old now if she had survived. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Richard had recently submitted his DNA to every genetic testing database available, hoping against hope for a match. On a cold Tuesday morning in March, His phone rang with news that would change everything. "Mr. Morrison," the voice said, "we have a match. Emma Chun, age 23, is your biological daughter. She's alive, sir. Your daughter is alive." Richard Morrison, one of the most powerful men in America, dropped his phone and wept like a child. At exactly the same time, Alexander was meeting with his own private investigator, a man who had finally tracked down Emma's current location. "She's working at a small bookstore in Brooklyn," the investigator reported, "living under her legal name, Emma Chun. Interesting thing, though. I ran a background check, and there's something you should know about her birth certificate." The two most powerful men in New York City arrived at Emma's small Brooklyn apartment within minutes of each other. Emma, who had been living quietly, working at the bookstore and trying to heal her broken heart, opened her door to find both the man she loved and a stranger who looked eerily familiar standing in her hallway. Richard Morrison looked at the young woman in the doorway and felt his heart stop. She had her mother's eyes, the same warm brown that had haunted his dreams for 20 years. The shape of her face, the way she held her head when she was confused, it was like looking at a ghost of his beloved wife. "Emma," he whispered, and something in the way he said her name made her take a step back. Alexander stepped forward, confusion written all over his face. "Emma, who is this man?" Richard looked from Emma to Alexander and back again, pieces of an impossible puzzle falling into place. "You're Alexander Blackwood," he said slowly. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same question," Alexander replied, his protective instincts kicking in as he moved closer to Emma. Emma looked between the two men, her mind racing. "Will someone please tell me what's going on?" Richard Morrison reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph that was worn soft from years of handling. It showed a younger version of himself with a beautiful woman, holding a 3-year-old girl with brown eyes and a smile that could light up the world. "Emma," Richard said, his voice breaking, "I'm your father." The world stopped spinning. Emma felt like she was falling through space and time, everything she thought she knew about herself crumbling around her. She looked at the photograph, then at Richard, then at Alexander, who was staring at both of them in shock. "That's impossible," Emma whispered. "My parents died when I was 3. I've been in foster care my entire life." "No," Richard said gently. "There was an accident. Your mother died, but you survived. Someone at the hospital made a mistake, or maybe someone wanted us to believe you were gone. I've been searching for you for 20 years. Alexander's mind was working quickly, putting together pieces of information that painted a picture he didn't want to see. "Morrison," he said slowly. "Richard Morrison. You're the Richard Morrison. Morrison Industries." "Yes," Richard said, not taking his eyes off Emma. Alexander felt the world shift beneath his feet. The woman he loved, the barista who had captured his heart with her humility and dreams, was the daughter of his biggest business rival. Richard Morrison, the man whose company had been competing with Blackwood Industries for decades, the man Alexander had been taught to see as an enemy. "This can't be happening," Emma said, stumbling backward into her apartment. Both men followed her, the small space suddenly feeling impossibly cramped with all the emotion and shock filling it. Emma's world was crumbling around her as the truth emerged piece by piece. The foster care system that had moved her from home to home, the poverty that had shaped her entire life, the struggle that had made her strong, all of it had happened while her billionaire father searched for her desperately. Richard's guilt was overwhelming. "I should have found you sooner," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I should have protected you. All those years you were alone, and I was right here in the same city." "But I wasn't alone," Emma said, looking at Alexander. "At least, I thought I wasn't." Alexander stepped toward her, but Emma held up her hand to stop him. "Is this why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Is this why you noticed me? Somehow you knew who I was." "No," Alexander said desperately. "Emma, I swear to you I had no idea. I fell in love with you when you were just a barista with beautiful dreams. This changes nothing. This changes everything," Emma shouted, and it was the first time either man had ever heard her raise her voice. "How do I know what's real anymore? How do I know if you love me or if you love what I represent now?" Richard Morrison looked between his daughter and Alexander Blackwood, and years of business, rivalry crystallized into something much more personal. "You will stay away from my daughter," he said, his voice carrying all the authority of a man who is used to being obeyed. "She's not your daughter," Alexander shot back. "You lost the right to call her that 20 years ago." "Stop it," Emma screamed. "Both of you, just stop. I am not a prize to be won or a possession to be claimed. I am a person, and I need time to think." But thinking was impossible with both men hovering over her, their conflict filling her small apartment with tension she couldn't bear. Emma had spent her entire life learning to be strong, to survive, to make her own way in the world. Now she was being asked to accept that everything she knew about herself was wrong. The questions tormented her day and night. Was Alexander's love real, or was he just attracted to her newfound status? Had he somehow known who she was all along? Was her father's love genuine, or was it built on guilt and regret? How could she trust anything when her entire identity had been built on lies? In her pain and confusion, Emma made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She went to Richard Morrison's lawyer and signed papers giving up any claim to the Morrison fortune. Then she disappeared again, this time more completely than before. Emma used the small savings she had managed to accumulate and bought a bus ticket to a place she had never been, where no one knew her story or her pain. She ended up in a small coastal town in Maine, where the air smelled like salt water and pine trees, where she could walk on empty beaches and try to figure out who she really was when she wasn't defined by poverty or wealth, by abandonment or privilege. She rented a tiny cottage near the ocean and got a job at a local diner, serving coffee and sandwiches to fishermen and tourists. It was honest work that reminded her of her time at Morning Brew, but without the complications of love and family and impossible dreams. She told herself she was healing, but mostly she was just surviving. Back in New York, both men were devastated by her disappearance. Richard Morrison threw himself into finding her again, using every resource at his disposal. Alexander, meanwhile, made a decision that shocked the business world. He began systematically giving away his wealth. First, he donated half his personal fortune to foster care reform, inspired by Emma's stories of growing up in the system. Then he restructured his company to be employee-owned, giving every worker a stake in the business they helped build. Finally, he liquidated his assets and put the money into a foundation dedicated to helping young people achieve their dreams regardless of their economic background. By the time Alexander tracked Emma down 6 months later, he was no longer one of the richest men in America. He was just a man who had chosen love over empire, who had proven that his feelings were never about Emma's status by giving up his own. He found her on the beach at sunset, her long hair whipping in the ocean wind, her face peaceful for the first time since he had known her. She turned when she heard his footsteps in the sand, and her heart jumped in her chest despite all her efforts to forget him. "How did you find me?" she asked. "I'll always find you," Alexander said simply. "No matter where you go, no matter how far you run, I'll always find you because my heart knows where yours is." "Why are you here, Alexander?" Emma asked, but she was already softening at the sight of him. "Because I need you to know that when I fell in love with you, you were just Emma. Not Emma Morrison, not Emma Chun, just Emma, the girl who left notes with my coffee, who dreamed of building something beautiful, who saw the best in everyone, including me. That's who I fell in love with, and that's who I'm still in love with." Emma looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something different. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. The weight of the world was gone from his shoulders, replaced by something lighter but stronger. "What did you do?" she asked. "I chose you," Alexander said. "I chose love over money, meaning over success, you over everything else in the world. I don't have billions anymore, Emma. I don't even have millions. But I have something I never had before. I have a heart that knows what it wants." Emma felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. "And what does your heart want?" "You," Alexander said, stepping closer. "Just you. Forever." The confession that followed was like a dam breaking. Emma told Alexander about her fear of being loved for what she represented rather than who she was. Alexander told Emma about the emptiness of success without someone to share it with, They talked until the sun rose over the ocean, healing wounds that had festered for months with the simple medicine of truth. "I was so afraid," Emma admitted as they walked hand in hand along the water's edge. "Afraid that you only loved me because I was Richard Morrison's daughter. Afraid that he only wanted me back because of guilt. I didn't know how to tell the difference between real love and obligation." "Real love is choosing someone when you don't have to," Alexander said. "Real love is giving up everything for someone, not because you have to, but because you want to. Real love is being here on this beach with you, having nothing but feeling like I have everything." But their reconciliation was incomplete until Emma faced the other relationship that had been broken by these revelations. Richard Morrison had never stopped looking for his daughter, and when Alexander called to tell him where Emma was, the older man was on the next plane to Maine. The reunion between Emma and her father happened in the small diner where she worked, over coffee and pie that tasted like forgiveness. Richard looked older, worn down by months of worry and regret. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "I don't expect you to want me in your life. But I need you to know that not a day has gone by in 20 years that I haven't thought about you, haven't looked for you, haven't loved you." Emma studied his face, seeing her own eyes reflected back at her, seeing the genuine pain of a father who had lost everything that mattered. "I don't know how to be your daughter," she said honestly. "I don't know how to be rich or powerful or any of the things you probably expected." "I don't want you to be anything other than who you are," Richard said. "The woman who chose to give up a fortune rather than compromise her integrity. The woman who ran away rather than accept love she wasn't sure was real. The woman who built her own life from nothing and made it beautiful. That's my daughter, and I'm prouder of you than I ever thought possible." The healing between father and daughter was slow and careful, built on long conversations and shared memories of a mother Emma barely remembered, but Richard had never forgotten. They discovered they had the same sense of humor, the same stubborn streak, the same deep need to build something meaningful rather than just accumulate wealth. Richard learned to respect Emma's independence, while Emma learned to accept that her father's love wasn't built on guilt, but on genuine pride in the woman she had become. They would never have a traditional father-daughter relationship, but they built something better, a friendship based on mutual respect and chosen love. The final piece of Emma's healing came when she realized she could have both her father and Alexander in her life, but only on her own terms. She returned to New York not as Richard Morrison's lost daughter or Alexander Blackwood's rescued princess, but as Emma Chun, a woman who knew exactly who she was and what she wanted. She used her business education and her father's support to start her own company, a chain of community centers that provided job training, childcare, and support services for people transitioning out of poverty. It wasn't built with inherited money, but with her vision, her determination, and investors who believed in her mission. Alexander became her partner in every sense of the word, working alongside her to build something that mattered more than profit margins or market share. Together, they proved that love could indeed conquer all, but only when it was built on equality, respect, and shared dreams. The story reaches crescendo on a perfect spring morning in Central Park, where Emma and Alexander exchanged vows surrounded by an unlikely family. Richard Morrison walked his daughter down the aisle, his face shining with pride and joy. Emma's co-workers from the diner, Alexander's former employees who were now business partners, and dozens of people whose lives had been changed by Emma's community centers filled the seats. As Emma and Alexander promised to love each other through poverty and wealth, through struggle and success, through everything life might bring, there wasn't a dry eye in the gathering. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a celebration of love that had survived every test, overcome every obstacle, and emerged stronger for having been challenged. Richard Morrison, watching his daughter marry the man who had proven his love by giving up everything for her, finally understood that some things were more valuable than money, more powerful than business empires, more lasting than any fortune. He had lost his daughter once to tragedy, but he had found her again through the miracle of love that conquers all. Emma Chin Blackwood, standing in her simple white dress with her hand in Alexander's, looked out at the faces of everyone who had become her chosen family and knew that she had finally found where she belonged, not in wealth or poverty, not in struggle or success, but in love that was freely given and freely received. If you believe that love can bloom where no one expects, that real wealth is measured in the hearts we touch rather than the money we accumulate, Maybe it's time to join us on this journey of incredible stories that prove anything is possible when we choose love over fear. As Emma and Alexander kissed to seal their vows, as Richard Morrison wiped away tears of joy, as their friends cheered and the spring wind carried the sound of their happiness across the city, we're reminded that true love. Stories aren't about fairy tale endings. They're about choosing each other every single day, building something beautiful together, and proving that love really can conquer all when it's real, when it's tested, and when it's worth fighting for. We have more stories like this coming. Tales of love that defies all odds, dreams that refuse to die, and hearts that find each other across impossible distances. So don't forget to hit the like button and turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss what happens next in our collection of stories that prove love always finds a way. Would you have done the same in Emma's position? Would you have chosen love over security, family over independence, or would you have made different choices along the way? Would you have been able to forgive 20 years of separation, or trust love that seemed too good to be true? I'd love to know what you think about this incredible journey of discovery, forgiveness, and the kind of love that changes everything it touches.